Hi everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the two spotlight interviews this morning with Jigar and Shail. We're seeing promising future of electrification and decarbonization with these visionary, passionate leaders and experts from government and from private sectors. At the same time, we're seeing great support from the community. One of the largest battery community that I'm participated in, called Volta Foundation, has more than 30,000 members working in batteries, EVs, energy storage technologies across the industry, academia, and startups. Today, we are glad to have the executive director of the Volta Foundation, Mr. Yan Ye, to join Energy Week, and then to give a presentation of the battery report, a comprehensive overview of the battery landscape. Welcome, Yan.
Hello, Catherine. Thank you so much. It's good to see everybody at this wonderful conference. It's been such a tremendous week of doing presentations. So hopefully this upcoming session will be informative and interesting to everybody. All right, folks. So today I'd like to share with you the work that we've been doing at the Volta Foundation on the battery report. So let me share my screen and we'll go from there. So the battery report is a project by the Volta Foundation to create a comprehensive overview of the battery landscape. Today, I'd like to share with you some excerpts from our 2021 report, hopefully to stimulate some collaboration and better understanding across the ecosystem. So today's agenda for the hour. Quickly, I want to introduce everybody to the Volta Foundation, who we are, and what kind of work that we're doing. And a quick introduction to the battery report. It's quite a unique project in that it is written by a collaborative team of battery experts. So I want to share with you a little bit about our philosophy of how this report came to be. And of course, we'll spend the most of our time today diving into the report's content and then a quick call to action at the end for Q&A as well as ways for you to be involved. Okay, so let's get started. So, we are an independent nonprofit membership organization that's here to advance the battery industry. So, as a nonprofit, there are four themes that we focus on. Number one is bridging silos. So, we see ourselves as an organization sitting in the middle, connecting folks in industry, academia, finance, and policy circles. So, to that effort, we have a large number of events and publications that we organize and make available as resources for the community. Number two is developing leaders. As we talk to our member companies day to day, one of the biggest pain points that member companies are telling us is the difficulty in hiring for talent in the battery industry today. So, as a nonprofit, we think a lot about increasing the pool of talent in the battery industry. How do we, for example, help people transition from other industries into the battery industry? How do we think deeply and carefully about the pipeline of talent that we're cultivating today? Number three is democratizing access. This is the part of our work that's perhaps the most visible. We have a large number of events, both virtual and in person, as well as publications, both long form and short form. Everything we do, our events and publications, are free and open access to the public. So, this democratizing aspect of our work is really important to us as a nonprofit. And number four is advocacy, both in terms of the culture side of things, making sure the battery ecosystem is a nice place to work for everybody, as well as on the policy side. So when rules, regulations, and fundings are being decided, we want to be at the table advocating for our member companies. This is a quick introduction about the Volta Foundation. Like Catherine mentioned, today we're 30,000 individual members globally. These are battery professionals working all over the world. And these individuals represent 5,000 different organizations. And like I mentioned, today we make impact by hosting events and publications. We have a team of about 20 folks working at the Volta Foundation to realize the relatively large number of projects that we have. Most of these folks are volunteers, so nights and weekends they contribute their time and energy to realizing the projects that we have. And as a member, we're supported by a member company. So this is a list of some of the companies that are supporting us and our partners. So, a quick outline about the activities that we've worked on in the last 2 years. So, we started out organizing the Battery Brunch. It has a funny name. I think Looking at the list of attendees, I think many of you have attended Battery Brunch before. It started out literally as a brunch in the Bay Area, but it's really evolved into a monthly conference of battery professionals. So every month, about 500 to 1,000 battery professionals globally come together to attend the event. And so our virtual events have extended from the US in Battery Brunch to Europe. And also, we have an event in Chinese as well called the Battery Roundtable. So these are the list of the virtual events that we have. We also have a series of in person events as well. In terms of publications, I want to draw your attention to Battery Bits, which is our short form publication where we've invited battery professionals to write about what they do, deep dive content about the day to day work that they're doing, and we publish that information. Bridging the gap between academic publications on the one hand and news articles on the other. And we try to fit in the middle where we produce content that is interesting and valuable to battery professionals. So that's Battery Bits. It's a short publication. I think the thing that we want to highlight today really is the long form publication called the Battery Report. So this is our annual report that we produce along with our partners, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those in a couple of slides. So a quick introduction to the Battery Report and the philosophy behind this. The report is an annual report produced by the Volta Foundation and our partners as a resource for the battery community. Our goal here is to highlight and amplify some of the best work done in the field and to create a comprehensive and high quality overview of the battery industry, including industry news, research, talent, and policy landscape. So we really try to be comprehensive in our coverage. The report is financially supported by our member companies. So it is an open access resource for the community. So we don't put this behind a paywall. It is massively collaborative. Last year's report was written by a group of battery experts. More than 40 experts from 30 institutions contributed to this work that I'm about to present to you. Again, it's open access resource for the community, and it is by far the most read report covering the industry, 100,000 downloads this year. Here you see a list of the authors, the contributors, and our advisory committee. In terms of geographical distribution of our readership, our top readers are US, UK, and Germany, but we have readers from more than 160 countries around the world. So the next part is a deep dive into the battery report content. I think you're all looking forward to this. So in this next section, I'm excited to highlight some of the most popular content from our 2021 report, which we published earlier this year. And with a few months worth of hindsight, I hope that this content will be informative to you if you're new to the report and thought provoking once more if you're already familiar with some of the contents here. So, the first section of the report covers industry. Here we cover notable events in 2021, a review of the key trends that we see in the industry, the commercial movements, and we try to put a spotlight on some of the key technical directions of the year. Specifically in 2021, we saw industry players moving to pursue higher energy densities at lower costs. So, some approaches that are being explored include the development of silicon anodes, solid state batteries, and the increasing adoption of iron phosphate chemistries. Sodium ion emerged with an announcement from CATL, and the continued expansion of storage applications on the grid remains a promising area of future growth. Later in these slides, we'll highlight the trends that we see from automotive OEMs, including the formation of new joint ventures. On the financial side, we highlight the large quantities of climate venture capital, as well as the announcement by global auto OEMs making financial commitments investing in the future of electric vehicles. All right, so first, let's take a trip down memory lane and review some of the notable events in 2021. Again, this is a report published earlier this year, so these are some of the reviews of the year prior. In Q1, General Motor committed to making only zero emission vehicles by 2035, which was a big announcement at the time. Volvo upped the ante and says that they will go all electric by 2030. Also notable in Q1 is that Northvolt acquired a Stanford spin-out called Cuberg, marking an interesting event of a larger company acquiring a smaller one in our industry. Okay, in Q2, notable events. BYD announced the Blade battery cell format. making progress towards the cell to pack design philosophy to reduce cost and increasing energy density. Also of note, SK and LG Chem settled their high profile lawsuit for $1.8 billion. Ascend Elements partnered up with Honda to recycle EV batteries, putting a spotlight on the importance of partnership and collaboration throughout the battery supply chain as the battery moves through its life cycle. In Q3, CATL announced battery cells based on sodium ion chemistry, a really interesting solution to potentially avoiding the volatilities in the lithium supply chain. General Motors announced a $1.8 billion recall. I think we all remember that for its Bolt EV batteries, so highlighting the importance of safety and reliability as important metrics still in the business case for EVs. In Q4, I think notable was LG Chem and Stellantis partner up to build a 40 gigawatt hour factory planned for 2024. And CATL announced a $5 billion recycling facility in Hubei. Mitrachem also raised their Series A, seemed like a long time ago, to produce RFP in North America. The battery report is a report that we produce annually. So in January of 2023, you will see again a retrospective of these events in 2022. So please look forward to that in a couple of months. So jumping into the content of the report, key trends. Cost is quite interesting. So pack prices in 2021 fell to $132 per kilowatt hour. It's important to note that there are significant regional differences. In China, average about $111 per kilowatt hour, whereas in the EU, prices were 60% higher at $177 per kilowatt hour. Going forward, I think there are factors really driving battery prices both up and down. So, on the downside, changes to chemistry, including the increasing adoption of iron phosphate chemistries in the EV mix, as well as the continuing improvement of high nickel cathodes, will help to reduce costs. But on the upside, higher demand for raw materials, including lithium, cobalt, nickel, electrolyte, and so on, could outpace the rate at which the physical supply chain can keep pace. Another important factor in cost is it's important to note that battery form factor also plays a role at cell level cost as well. So, as of today, cylindrical cells are still meaningfully cheaper than cells in other form factors. And the overall trend of cost reduction of the traditional lithium ion chemistries might present an obstacle for solid state chemistries and sodium ion chemistries to catch up and keep pace. This is something that we used to see in the solar industry as well, with silicon continuing to be dominant. One thing that's really valuable about the report is that we try to, at a high level, show the strategic partnerships between the main other OEMs and their battery suppliers. So here we see three high level trends in terms of partnership and the automakers' approaches to these. American OEMs are building relationships with Japanese and South Korean battery manufacturers, General Motors, Tesla, and so on. As you see here, are building relationships with these suppliers. European OEMs, on the other hand, have announced plans to cultivate local battery supply chains. So, for example, BMW, Volvo, VW, and so on. And Chinese, Japanese, and South Korean other OEMs are working closely with their respective local battery manufacturers. Another thing that's really interesting to think about is OEMs' roadmaps in terms of strategic investments in the various solutions to ensure their long term competitiveness in this space. So here we've organized as best as we can a table sharing what they have announced in terms of their strategic approaches. In terms of cell manufacturing, I think it's worth noting that Tesla has announced 3 kilowatt hour worth of global capacity by 2030, significantly higher than the other competitors here. In terms of cell design, different players have different approaches. General Motors Just going with the Ultium pouch cells, whereas Tesla is pioneering the 4680 cell format. In terms of pack design, cell to vehicle, or generally the and away from cell to module to pack to larger cells and to reduce complexity and cost. One thing to really keep in mind is the advancements in manufacturing processes will have a big role to play in reducing the capex of building up these gigafactory capabilities. And so VW, Tesla, and General Motors has made some announcements in that area. Cell chemistry continues to evolve from in the last 10 years or so, and ever higher nickel content chemistries. And then going forward, we're seeing the emergence of LFP chemistries. Another area to pay attention to are patent applications. So these are the top five categories by patent classes. One thing I'll note is that you see most of these companies are based in Asia. Something we've highlighted in our notable events is this intellectual property lawsuit between AI and LG Chem. Bit of a history in 2019, a dispute came up after 77 employees moved from LG to SK and allegedly misappropriated trade secrets. So the dispute was eventually resolved after this long timeline of a couple of years. So it was resolved after SK agreed to pay LG Chem a $1.8 billion settlement, plus ongoing royalties and a 10-year mutual covenant not to sue. In the context of the battery industry as a whole, as the industry grows and matures, more and more IP disputes will happen, similar to other industries that are going through this phase of growth, similar to, for example, biotech or semiconductors. And they all went through this. So, this is a trend to keep in mind. So this is a slide highlighting some of the innovators to keep tabs on, organized into broad stages from raw materials to pack design and back. So this is a slide produced by Intercalation Station. So a shout out to the wonderful work that Nick and his team is doing there. So diving into the different technologies and the different players working on those technologies, one of the most exciting areas of advancement is silicon anode. So here we compile a list of the silicon anode companies that are operating and the amount of funding that they've raised as of the end of 2021. So here we see Sila raising quite a lot of funding. I think as we make this year's slides, the funding levels has certainly, for most of these companies, have increased. And I think I can see that Amprius also went public a couple of weeks ago. Similar story to solid state batteries. This is a combination of solid state electrolyte batteries as well as solid state lithium metal batteries. So here we see QuantumScape, Solid Power, SES, and so on. So these companies are good to keep an eye on. So climate tech venture capital has seen a dramatic increase in the last couple of years. So in the first three quarters of 2021, climate tech startups raised about $32 billion, so more than 5x increase from the funding levels from 2016. Deal sizes have also gotten dramatically larger. So the average Series A and B rounds have doubled in size, and the average series, so the growth post Series C round, have increased from $139 million to an average of $379 million. So there's a lot of capital there flowing, at least as of 2021, to the optimism in the industry for a strong push for electrification. As we update the slides for this year, I think 2022 in the United States, the IRA funding, hopefully this will continue people's certainty about the future growth of the industry. We also compiled an investor landscape by different technologies that these investors have made investments in: energy storage, e mobility, charging technologies, which is something that I think more and more folks are thinking about as vehicles' performance and cost improve. More attention will need to be paid for the charging infrastructure behind that support the ever growing number of EVs on the road. Mining and recycling, we need to make the batteries, and then at the end of its life, we need to figure out something to do with them. So lots and lots of innovations and funding opportunities here. Okay, so moving on to the second section, which is covering the research landscape. So in the report, we actually highlight relatively a large number of research papers and then summarizing their results. But in this presentation, I think for our audience, I want to highlight some of the high level overview, the takeaways for research. So in terms of the specific papers that we highlight, this is the categories of papers that we find. In terms of high level insights, the number of paper published actually went down a bit in 2021 due to the pandemic, and the percentage of review papers have increased. So I think for the academics in the crowd, I think this will maybe bring a chuckle to people. So scientists, unfortunately, in terms of the papers published, are doing less original research by percentage. Another interesting note is research from regions. The largest region is China, continues to dominate the number of articles published on batteries. Another trend that's emerging as the battery industry and the research community mature and scale is this importance of transparency, accountability, and best practices. So, journals are encouraging best practices in battery research. For example, ACS Energy Letters has published a standard protocol for redox flow batteries and a checklist for battery modeling, along with examples from Joule as well. In terms of data and code availability, we're making progress as well with wonderful projects like the Battery Archive, PyBAM, and so on. So, probably the slide that gets the most attention in our research section is this comparison highlighting the different areas of focus between academics and folks in industry. So, on the left, we see academic publications by topic. So, here you see a lot of attention on battery management. And then, of course, on the chemistry side of things, cathode anode electrolyte separator. So, these are some of the topics that are really being focused on by academics. But on the patent application side in industry, we see the largest number of patent applications are in the areas of battery pack design and battery management, and then relatively fewer chemistry innovations in electrolyte, cathode anode, and so on. It's quite interesting to see these differences in areas of focus, and it's always a healthy and interesting debate to think through whether this mismatch is a good thing or a bad thing if it's healthy for the ecosystem. The third section, we covered talent and community. I think one thing that we should really pay more attention to is the talent pipeline that the industry needs as we scale. What we've done is for different regions, we have compiled different publicly available information highlighting the sort of the talent shortage in the different regions. So, for example, Europe has launched an aggressive training programs to tackle the talent supply shortage. So, European Commission expects up to 4 million new jobs to be created by 2025. And so they're planning to train 800,000 workers in the same time frame. So roughly 160,000 workers need to be trained per year. There's a number of initiatives, including the European Battery Alliance launching the EBA 250 Academy, as well as local training programs related to reskilling and upskilling the workers. In South Korea, LG, SK, Samsung shortage of research and engineering specialists. Something that they've highlighted as a pain point in South Korea is just a small incoming talent pool. So our sources and Reuters cite that South Korea is short almost 3,000 graduate level in areas for research and design, according to the KPIA. Also in Asia, there's fierce competition with overseas companies. Companies in Korea, Japan, and China have fierce competition for talents. Also, with companies, there's a trend to build in-house training pipelines. So LG Energy Solutions, which is the largest battery maker by volume in South Korea, plans to launch a new battery smart factory department at Korea University in the spring of this year with guaranteed jobs for graduates. In China, similar story. China's manufacturing talent development planning guide estimate that the clean energy industry by 2025 will need 1.2 million people to work in it. So they project a talent gap of more than a million people. So they quote that the thousands of new graduates each year is insufficient to meet the current demand. China also has a great vocational training program since August of 2020. They have held 12 sessions as of 2021 of its battery production engineer vocational program, with more than 1,000 personnel receiving certifications. So we're based in the US, so we have some data from the US. So what we've done is we taken data from Department of Labor H-1B data and just plotted them here. So we see that at least for H-1B battery related job applications, in the US is really geographically centralized in California and Michigan. So both of these states have more than 100 applications for H-1B visas. And across categories, software shows the biggest year to year growth in number of positions. And on the right, you see the year to year growth of the cumulative number of H-1B jobs here. In terms of salary, US reported H-1B salaries. I think this is probably the lower bound since this doesn't include equity and bonuses and so on. So H-1B over the last 5 years has surged over 40%. And this is adjusted for inflation. So quite interesting numbers here. Okay, so leaving time for Q&A, I just want to quickly say the Battery Report is a massively collaborative project. So if you're interested in collaborating with us and sharing data, for example, the approach that we take is to highlight and amplify the best work that's being done in the industry. So if you have interesting data that you'd like us to highlight in this year's report, please reach out. The report is open access thanks to our sponsors. So if you're interested in sponsoring this effort, please scan the QR code and I'm happy to talk to you about sponsorship opportunities. And with that, I think let's go into our Q&A. So the first question, which is better, cylindrical or prismatic and why? This is an interesting question. I don't personally have a preference for either. I think they each have their own plus and minuses. In terms of cost and ease of manufacturing, I think obviously it's faster to roll the jelly roll than to stack in a prismatic fashion. But when we're thinking about um, design choices, battery engineers, of course, are thinking as a kind of a optimization problem between energy, power, cost, cycle life, safety, and so on. And so it really depends on the application and the particular trade offs that are important to the company. Sorry, it's a non answer, but I think it's a really complicated approach. Probably one thing I'll say, just summarizing the current state of the industry, is that reasonable people with great engineering teams have decided on different approaches. So it's not a clear cut one way or the other today. Maybe one day it will be a solution that emerges that is the best overall solution. But today, we don't know what it is yet. At least I don't know. The next question is, why do you see so much IP in BMSI from academia? Perhaps more academics should focus on core technologies in the cell. This is a great question. So the researchers that are working on BMS are a completely different set of people than the ones that are working on the chemistry and the hardware side of things. So typically BMS engineers have electrical engineering backgrounds, computer science backgrounds, and the cell level technologies, cathode anode separator materials innovations are done by engineers with chemistry and material science backgrounds. So the question is, why are there so much more IP or papers published in BMS? I think I can speculate in that it's probably the resources that are required to produce a paper related to BMS and software is less than needing lab space and glove boxes and needing to physically make batteries. So I think if you just look at the pure quantity of papers published is not a good reflection of the amount of effort being put into either. Maybe a better metric would be the number of researchers engaged in the different areas. That I'm not sure about. It would be a good thing to look into. This question: which legacy industries have the most transferable skills? Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics. So it's one of those things that as the battery industry scales, especially after IRA, there's going to be a lot more manufacturing, process engineering work that needs to be done domestically. I think industries where manufacturing is done at a large scale generally would transfer. So things like the food industry, pharmaceutical industry, semiconductor industry, these are industries, and sorry if I'm more US centric in my view, but these are industries that already have large manufacturing presence, talent pool in the US. And as I talk to our friends in the recruiting industry, I think these are some of the places that they can go and find talents. Yeah, so I'd say industries with a manufacturing footprint. Kwangtae is: what do you see the readiness of silicon anodes and solid state electrolyte? Yeah, these are two separate questions. So let's say comparatively, we see today commercially available lithium ion batteries. Many of them have silicon in its anode. So I would say comparatively, silicon anodes is already commercialized, whereas solid state batteries, both electrolyte and lithium metal batteries, are not there yet as far as I know. I think that actually speaks to a larger problem of our industry in that there's not really a standard way of gauging TRL or readiness of a technology. And this makes it really difficult for investors to think about both private and public investors. Taking an example of best practices from other industries that are more mature than us and have gone through similar journeys and pain points as our industry. So, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, it's relatively straightforward to gauge the technical readiness of a drug. There is a very well thought out process for commercializing a drug in the pharmaceutical industry, for example. But we don't have that yet for the battery industry today. The jury is out on whether we need to have regulation and the government involved in this process. But I think most people agree in the industry that eventually, one way or another, there will be more standardization and more consensus on a way to gauge technical readiness of different technologies. So I think that probably long term is a trend to think about, and also for everybody on this call to really be thoughtful about. The current state of announcements by press releases is not the end state of the battery industry. There needs to be some data driven decision making process. That would be what I would say about that. Those question: are there any trends toward changing iron phosphate cathodes in the near future, or do you think this material will prevail for a while? I'll answer the obvious and then the long term speculation. I'm not an LFP expert, so I can't say for sure. In the short term, I think because there is a drive towards lower cost batteries for EV applications. And LFP, just on the commodity metal side of things, can potentially be cheaper than nickel based chemistry. So I think this trend towards using LFP cathode material in applications where cost is a more important factor will continue to shift that way. For investors, and there's maybe a lot of people in this crowd interested in the future of LFP, there's a lot of debate on how much more room there is to optimize LFP chemistry. So I'm not an expert, so I can't really give a smart answer to that. Perhaps there are a lot of room for improvement, perhaps not, but I think that's better for somebody else to think about. Asked about are there trends toward design at the gigawatt scale. Karthik, I'm not sure if your question is on the gigafactory design. Certainly, there are a lot of innovations on the factory design part towards, for example, dry electrodes, faster qualification processes, smarter formation processes, integration, things like that on the sort of the X building design, the battery factory side. Certainly, there are design changes and improvements there. But I'm guessing maybe your question is really about gigawatt batteries for grid storage. And we haven't really looked into the data from 2022. Most folks in the industry, I think, have been really excited about the potential for batteries to be used in grid storage. So I think it's hard to say which year that application is going to take off. But I think in the long term, I'd be very surprised if, say, 20 years from now, batteries isn't a big part of how we manage the grid. Um, so I think the smart investors, technologists, and other people can think through that kind of near to medium term what the opportunity costs for using cells for EV versus grid storage, and then longer term, what are the technologies that makes the most sense for grid storage. All right, John's question: what are the biggest gaps between U.S. and Chinese battery industry? And how long do you think we can close the gaps? So I think we can sort of agree on some facts. I think battery manufacturing in China is at a much larger scale than it is in the US today. Obviously, just the install capacity is quite large as a gap. And then also in terms of the number of people that have experience manufacturing batteries at a large scale. So I say in terms of gaps, those are the biggest ones, capacity and talent in terms of the practical manufacturing of batteries. So, how long, hard do you think we can close the gaps? That's hard to say. I think in the US, we're just starting to think seriously about scaling up a domestic supply chain for everything from minerals to upstream materials to battery manufacturing. Um, so it's hard to say. Maybe when we come back a year or two later, after the IRA has a little bit of time to filter through the system, we will have a better forecast of it. But yeah, today it's quite muddy. I don't want to disappoint you too much by avoiding too much of this question. I think probably what I would say is it's not obvious to me that it's a foregone conclusion one way or the other. I think there's smart people on both sides saying the Chinese manufacturing is so far ahead that there's no way for the US to catch up. I'm not so sure about that, but yeah, there's healthy debate about this today. The second question from Anil: has Volta Foundation done any work on what financial deal terms are being negotiated by the startup OEMs? We have not, because we don't have insight about these things. So the approach that we've taken with the battery report is just to highlight and amplify the publicly available information, including the talent salary data. We highlight and summarize the publicly available information. So we don't do too much interviews of tree players. I think, Anil, you probably have better insight than Volta Foundation, but we would love to work with you. All right, Amal's question: do you think we have enough room for machine learning advancements from current BMS and battery data? If yes, what areas do we think are less explored? Good questions. It's a very large question, so I'll try to break it down a little bit. Obviously, a lot of advancements in machine learning that we all agree on. On the battery side, something that people don't often think about but is actually true is that as demand for battery increases, there will be more batteries in the world. And with more batteries in the world, that means there's going to be more battery data in the world, right? From mining, from manufacturing, from usage to second life. When we're thinking about machine learning applications on battery data, the problem with battery data is that it's not one thing. Um, so if you look at the battery throughout its life cycle, from simulation, from manufacturing, from infield use, the data that's collected at different life cycles take different shapes. For machine learning experts, we really need to think carefully and clearly about what kind of data is the most valuable and that you can do the most extract the most interesting value from. I'll keep going for about 15 more seconds so I don't disappoint them all. So the first thing to know is there's going to be more battery data. Second is to recognize that there's different shapes that the data takes place. And what's the most valuable? Safety. I think maybe that's where I would go. But I'm not a machine learning expert, though. All right, Catherine, how do industry startup VCs collaborate better through communities like Volta Foundation? It's a great question. So the Volta Foundation, we're set up both as a trade association, so we serve our member companies, as well as a professional association. So we have this community of 30,000 battery professionals globally. So, one question is, how do individuals benefit? We have a large number of events and publications. Individuals are welcome to join our membership as an individual and should take advantage of the resources to provide to help them advance in their career at every stage of their career. So that's on the individual side. In terms of companies, one thing is we welcome you to join us as a member company at different levels of sponsorships. For all of our member companies, of course, we provide good networking opportunities and opportunities to reach our individual members. So specifically, how can we collaborate better? Um, Number one is participate. So we have these in-person and virtual events that are open for people in industry, startup, and VCs to come and attend, and they do. So I think just coming to the platform and acting with other folks and networking, I think that's probably the lowest hanging fruit. We do work with our member companies on a large number of initiatives that our member companies care about. So, for example, being more hands on with workforce development, with policy advocacy, providing databases for different supply chain verticals, and even facilitating detours and in person events. There are all kinds of things that we do for our member companies to help improve the health of the ecosystem. So if you have ideas for collaboration, please reach out. All right, Michael Rollenberger and others seem to highlight lithium sulfur as a primary go-to for the future. Have you exposure to this innovation? Yeah, this is a good question. In the 2022 report, we actually have a special section on emerging chemistries. So in the past, I think the report has really focused on chemistries that are being scaled today, nickel-based chemistries, LFP, and so on. But as everybody knows, battery chemistries is a evolving topic. So lithium sulfur, a couple of startups working in the area. One thing that we haven't talked about, surprisingly, in the last couple of minutes is today the focus is on electric vehicles. But what about other more novel applications? I think VCs, investors, makes the most money when not just scaling up existing industries, but really inventing and enabling whole new category of applications. So if in the 80s someone handed you a lithium ion battery, you don't want to invest in a company that's making a flashlight that lasts a month. You want to invest in a company that's taking the battery and making a smartphone with it. So the question is lithium sulfur, what do we do with it? I think the really exciting thing about lithium sulfur is that it has really good specific energy density, meaning it's very light as a battery. Just theoretically, it lends itself really well to aerospace applications, things like drones and that kind of applications. I think on paper, it has technical challenges, and I'm sure that's why there are companies working on the technical solutions for them. But if lithium sulfur batteries perform well and have its sort of engineering and scientific challenges resolved, it could enable this whole new industry of battery based aviation for small drones to bigger craft. And that's exciting. But again, I'm not a lithium sulfur expert, so I'm not sure what the state of the art is on that front. Hey, Cassidy from Strategy and Research. What's the future of BMS and battery data analytics? Are there any promising technologies that could provide lifetime data on batteries to enable second applications and extend battery life? We got a 5 minute reminder, so I think this is going to be second to last question. Yeah, this is a really good question. So we're thinking about second life and we're thinking about battery data. Let's say that you're the audience and I have, say, electric car, and I want to sell this electric car to you. You probably offer me a price X for this car. But if I offer this car to you with the operational history of the car, let's say how many cycles the battery has gone through, what temperature it's stored at, how the car was parked, drive, and charged, you would offer me a price that's X plus Y. And I think that plus Y is the value of that battery data. So I think the very trivial example, just having the data gets you the value without any kind of intelligence on top of it. So that's the trivial answer is that the data has value. It's just not obvious how much that value is. And smarter applications like BMS, machine learning, extracting more value from that data will be a large area to explore. And promising technologies provide lifetime data. I think just like any data application, everything from building databases for this data, figuring out ETL for the data, and then building on top of it analytics, machine learning, predictive analytics. There's room for all of those. Okay, one more. What do you think the mix between dry and wet global production will be? Good question. I don't know. Maybe we will explore that in this year's report. Sorry to end on a low, but yeah, this is not something that I have insight on. But please reach out if you have thoughts on it. I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Yan. I would
Thank you,
really
Catherine.
appreciate your help here. Really amazing presentation on the battery reports. And then we hope to see the new annual report this year to show more exciting movement and then what the new industry trends for in 2022. And also thanks again for Volta Foundation being one of the best event partners for Energy Week 2022. I hope there will be more collaboration between TDK Ventures, other VCs, our industry partners to work together with communities to make this energy innovation a better place. Now, I hope to take the final 1 minute to introduce our afternoon sessions, which will be also one of my favorite discussions on the topic of future of mining and battery supply chain. So for this session, we invited Mr. Lithium, Joe Laurie. I'm not sure whether you are fans of his Global Lithium podcast, but I love that so much. We'll have him to join us for the fireside chat. And then we'll also have a panel discussion in the topic of future of mining and battery supply chain. And we'll welcome everyone to join at 5 p.m. Pacific time this afternoon. And hope you all enjoyed today's session. And then hope to see you in the afternoon.
Thank you, Catherine. Really good to be here. See you all this afternoon. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.